This is the history of money.
Economic crises are a recurring feature of modern capitalism. They have been a part of our economic landscape for centuries, affecting nations and economies in various ways. They are periods of intense economic distress, marked by sharp declines in economic activity, which can lead to prolonged recessions or even depressions. Widespread financial instability often accompanies these downturns, causing significant disruptions in the lives of ordinary people and leading to social unrest. These crises can take many forms, from stock market crashes and banking panics to sovereign debt crises and currency collapses. Each type of crisis has its own triggers and consequences. While each crisis has its unique characteristics, they all share some common features. A loss of confidence in the financial system is a hallmark of these events. This loss of confidence leads to a sharp contraction in credit availability, making it difficult for businesses and consumers to borrow money, which in turn exacerbates the downward spiral in economic activity. Economic crises are often triggered by a combination of factors, including excessive risk-taking, regulatory failures, and global imbalances. These factors create a fragile economic environment. The bursting of asset bubbles, such as the dot-com bubble in the late 1990s and the housing bubble in the mid-2000s, has often been a precursor to major economic crises. These bubbles are fueled by speculative investments and unsustainable growth. These bubbles are characterized by periods of irrational exuberance, where asset prices become detached from their underlying fundamentals. Investors, driven by greed and fear of missing out, push prices to unsustainable levels. When these bubbles burst, the consequences can be severe, leading to widespread financial distress and economic contraction. The sudden collapse in asset prices can wipe out significant wealth. The impact of economic crises can be devastating, leading to job losses, business failures, and increased poverty. Entire industries can be decimated, and recovery can take years. The social costs of these crises can be equally profound, leading to increased inequality, social unrest, and political instability. Governments may face significant challenges in maintaining order and providing social services. Understanding the causes and consequences of economic crises is essential for policymakers and investors alike, as it can help them to mitigate the risks of these events and develop effective responses when they occur. Proactive measures can prevent crises from escalating. By studying past crises, we can learn valuable lessons about the vulnerabilities of our economic systems and develop strategies to prevent future crises from occurring. This knowledge is crucial for building a more resilient and stable economic future. The Great Depression, which began in 1929 and lasted for most of the 1930s, was the most severe economic crisis in modern history. It was a time when the world seemed to be falling apart economically, and the effects were felt far and wide, touching nearly every corner of the globe. It was a period of unprecedented economic hardship, marked by widespread unemployment, bank failures, and a sharp decline in global trade. Factories that once buzzed with activity were now silent, and trading floors that had been bustling with energy were eerily empty. The crisis had a profound impact on the lives of millions of people around the world, leaving a legacy of economic insecurity and social upheaval that would last for decades. Families who had once enjoyed a comfortable life found themselves standing in line at soup kitchens, struggling to make ends meet. The causes of the Great Depression were complex and multifaceted. Economists and historians have spent decades analyzing the myriad factors that contributed to this catastrophic event. One key factor was the excessive speculation in the stock market during the 1920s. The stock market had become a symbol of prosperity, and many people invested heavily, hoping to make quick profits. This speculation led to a massive bubble in stock prices, which eventually burst in October 1929, triggering a stock market crash of unprecedented scale. The crash wiped out billions of dollars in wealth and sent shockwaves through the financial system. The crash had a ripple effect throughout the economy, leading to a sharp decline in consumer spending and investment. Businesses closed their doors, and once thriving shopping streets became deserted. Another contributing factor was the collapse of the banking system. Banks, which had been the backbone of the economy, were now failing at an alarming rate. Banks had lent heavily to businesses and individuals during the boom years of the 1920s. When the economy contracted, many borrowers were unable to repay their loans, leading to a wave of bank failures. When the economy contracted, many borrowers were unable to repay their loans, leading to a wave of bank failures. These failures further contracted the money supply, deepening the economic downturn. People lost their life savings, and trust in the banking system was shattered. These failures further contracted the money supply, deepening the economic downturn. People were forced to leave their homes, carrying their belongings in search of a better life. The gold standard, which was the prevailing international monetary system at the time, also played a role in exacerbating the crisis. It tied the hands of central banks, preventing them from taking necessary actions to mitigate the crisis. The gold standard limited the ability of central banks to expand the money supply and provide liquidity to the financial system. This rigidity made it difficult to respond effectively to the economic collapse. The Great Depression had a devastating impact on the global economy. Industrial production plummeted and entire industrial areas were abandoned, leaving a landscape of economic desolation. Industrial production plummeted, unemployment soared, and international trade collapsed. Long lines of unemployed workers became a common sight, and factories that had once been the lifeblood of communities were now shuttered. The crisis led to widespread social unrest as millions of people were thrown out of work and into poverty. Protests and strikes became frequent as people demanded relief and change. The experience of the Great Depression had a profound impact on economic thinking, leading to the development of new economic theories and policy responses aimed at preventing future crises. Economists and policymakers sought to understand the failures of the past to build a more resilient economic system for the future. The gold standard, a monetary system where a country's currency is directly linked to gold, was the dominant monetary system for much of the 19th and early 20th centuries. This system meant that the value of a country's currency was directly tied to a specific amount of gold, providing a tangible and universally recognized measure of value. It was seen as a way to ensure price stability and prevent inflation. By linking currency to gold, governments aimed to create a stable economic environment where the value of money remained consistent over time, reducing the risk of runaway inflation that could erode purchasing power. However, the experience of the Great Depression exposed the limitations of the gold standard and ultimately led to its demise. The economic turmoil of the 1930s highlighted how rigid adherence to gold-backed currency could exacerbate financial crises rather than mitigate them. One of the main criticisms of the gold standard was its inflexibility. This rigidity meant that countries could not easily adjust their monetary policies to respond to changing economic conditions, making it difficult to address issues like unemployment and economic stagnation. Under the gold standard, countries were limited in their ability to expand the money supply, as this was directly tied to their gold reserves. This constraint meant that during times of economic growth, the money supply could not keep pace with the increasing demand for currency, potentially stifling economic expansion. During an economic downturn, when expansionary monetary policy was needed to stimulate the economy, the gold standard acted as a constraint. Governments and central banks found themselves unable to inject liquidity into the economy, which could have helped to counteract the effects of the downturn. This was particularly problematic during the Great Depression, when the gold standard prevented central banks from responding effectively to the crisis. The inability to increase the money supply or lower interest rates meant that economic recovery was slow and painful. The gold standard also contributed to the transmission of the crisis from one country to another. As countries adhered to the gold standard, economic shocks in one nation could quickly spread to others, creating a domino effect of financial instability. As the crisis deepened, countries began to hoard gold, which further contracted the global money supply. This hoarding behavior was driven by fear and uncertainty as nations sought to protect their own financial stability at the expense of the global economy. This led to a deflationary spiral as prices fell, further depressing economic activity. Deflation increased the real value of debt, making it harder for businesses and individuals to repay loans, which in turn led to more bankruptcies and economic distress. The gold standard also created competitive devaluations as countries sought to improve their trade balances by devaluing their currencies against gold. This race to the bottom created a vicious cycle of devaluation and retaliation, undermining international economic cooperation. This led to uncertainty and instability in international trade, further exacerbating the crisis. The lack of a stable and predictable currency system made it difficult for businesses to plan for the future, reducing investment and economic growth. The experience of the Great Depression led to a widespread loss of confidence in the gold standard. People began to question whether a rigid adherence to gold-backed currency was truly in their best interest, given the economic devastation they were witnessing. By the mid-1930s, most countries had abandoned the gold standard in favor of fiat currency systems. This shift allowed governments to have greater control over their monetary policies, enabling them to respond more flexibly to economic challenges. This marked a significant shift in monetary policy, as central banks were now free to pursue more flexible monetary policies, including expanding the money supply during times of economic distress. This newfound flexibility was crucial in allowing economies to recover more quickly from downturns. The abandonment of the gold standard paved the way for the development of modern monetary policy tools such as interest rate adjustments and quantitative easing. These tools have become essential in managing economic cycles, providing central banks with the means to stabilize economies and promote sustainable growth.